welcome to Arguably, where we explore ideas from every angle, powered by the Zera Institute. My name is Maral Salmassi, and I'll be your host. Before we begin, please subscribe and hit the like button to support our young channel. My guest today is Dalia Zaida, one of the most courageous voices to emerge from the Arab Spring. She's an Egyptian human rights activist and a committed advocate for peace, whose outspoken criticism of extremism and her public support for Israel have forced her into exile under constant death threats. Speaking from an undisclosed location, she continues to confront the movements that have caused immense harm in the Middle East, particularly the Muslim Brotherhood, which she argues has weaponized both Islamophobia and the Palestinian cause to advance a deeply extremist agenda. Dalia, it's an honor to have you with me today. Let's begin at the beginning with the mythology around anti-colonialism. When people say the Muslim Brotherhood emerged as an anti-colonial movement, they never mention that for centuries, the Arabs and the Ottomans were the colonizers. So I'd say it's not really a liberation movement, but an attempt to restore lost imperial prestige in religious packaging. Do you see the Muslim Brotherhood as genuinely anti-colonial or as a project to rebuild Islamic imperial power? How honest is their narrative about liberation from the West when so many of these societies were themselves brutal colonizers?
Yeah, thank you so much, Maral, to have me with you on this podcast. I'm really happy to be with you. And you started with a very difficult question. Unfortunately, we're living at a time now when facts are being twisted. People don't read history, don't know exactly how our world, especially in the Middle East region, has been shaped. And thus, they give themselves the freedom to play the role of the victim. To your point, actually, the Arab culture itself is a form of colonialism. And I would say also the Arab Islamic culture, because Arabs before Islam did not even have this ambition of expanding beyond the Arabian Peninsula. But after Islam and after having this kind of what they believe is a divine duty to spread the word of Islam, they started their movement outside of the Arabian Peninsula, and actually in several instances, in several places, especially in North Africa and in the Levant region, we saw them trying, we read about how they use even violence to force their new ideology at that time, which was the religion of Islam, and their culture, the Arab culture, on the community there. If we reverse the situation and think about the Middle East, in case the Arab Islamic Islamic colonialism has not been spread all over the region, how would it look like today? You will find Moroccans having a certain culture, Egyptians having a different culture and religion, people in the Levant region having a different culture and religion, and so actually, and this is also one of the main chronic problems that the region suffered from until today, and was the kind of the premises upon which all the conflicts the region is suffering today is based on, which is the fact that yes, all of us in the Arab world, speak the same language. The majority of us adopt the same religion, which is Islam, but actually we're very different. There is nothing can unify us, which made it much easier for the Arab leaders who came afterwards in the mid-20th century to try to unify Arabs. We saw, for example, the Pan-Arabist movement by Gamal Abdel Nasser in the 1950s and 60s. And then after him, what I call the Pan-Islamist movement after the Iranian Revolution, after the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and the rise of the re-rise of the Muslim Brotherhood and other radical Islamist groups in the region. So, and also the Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia and so on. So this was the era, this was the time when pan-Arabists and pan-Islamists tried to unify people in the Arab and Islamic world, but actually they couldn't, because these people belong to different cultures. So as a replacement, instead of looking for what's common among them to unify them, it was easier for them to try to find or create the illusion of a common enemy, so they become able to unify all of these people. The Pan-Arabist movement of Gamal Abdel Nasser was the first to refer to Israel as this common enemy. And actually, he was the first to stigmatize Israel by labeling it the agent of Western imperialism in the Arab world, or what he called at that time the Arab region, our Arab region, as if it should be Arab region and Israel is just the foreign entity there. Although actually many people don't know that the Jewish people are indigenous to the Middle East, even before Arabs, even before other religions like Islam or even Christianity. So here is the irony. So here is the irony. Instead of trying to find what's common between them, and because of the failure of this early colonialist Arab Islamic movement to unify all these people, it was easier for them by the mid-20th century to just find the common enemy and unify everyone around fighting against this common enemy.
Yeah, and that is the core idea of the Brotherhood, I'd say. It brings us to the Brotherhood's ideological DNA. From Hassan al-Banna to Said Qutb to Al-Qaeda and ISIS, you can trace one continuous line, a vanguard that uses jihad to build Islamic states and ultimately a caliphate. Hamas is simply the same ideology in Palestinian dress, with Shia Islamist Iranian sponsorship, different logos, same doctrine. When you look at the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas, do you see meaningful differences, or one ideological family with varying levels of honesty about the end goal? Where would you place Hamas on that spectrum?
That's a very interesting question, actually, because I believe all of these radical Islamist organizations fall under the same umbrella. And I will explain to you now, like, the spectrum of Islamists and Muslims, so it can give the audience just an idea about how there are so many shades of Muslims and Islamists, more than we think. So, but before that, actually, the Muslim Brotherhood were very interesting in the sense that their mission was not at all about reviving this pan-Arabist or pan-Islamist movement. Actually, their mission was to revive the Ottoman Empire, the caliphate system that the Ottoman Empire offered. And actually, many people perhaps don't know that the Muslim Brotherhood as a movement, when it started in 1928, it did not start in the capital city of Cairo or in the cosmopolitan city of Alexandria, but it started in a very small town, very distant on the borders of Sinai, in eastern Egypt, where people were so isolated from the liberal life in Cairo and Alexandria at that time. And it came with the promise, or Hassan al-Banna came to these people with the promise that if you follow me, so we can revive the caliphate system and you become more biased Muslims, more Muslims, in other words, this will make you better, more advantageous than the liberals in Cairo and in Alexandria and so on. And unfortunately, his movement attracted many of the desperate poor people in these places and gained momentum, and it became the Muslim Brotherhood as we know today. So, to the second part of your question about how sorry, I lost it for a second. It's about not about the Muslim Brotherhood specifically, but about
where would you place Hamas on that spectrum?
The spectrum of Islamists is exactly.
Yes.
But to understand where each of these groups stand, of course, like all the groups you mentioned, they are under one umbrella, which is the extremist, radicalist umbrella. But Muslims are not only that. Muslims are not only moderates or extremists. I even hate the word moderate because it's not accurate. But let's imagine a spectrum. On the very far left, it's the spectrum of Muslims and Islamists. On the very far left, you will find liberal Muslims, reformist Muslims, and Sufi Muslims, like myself, for example. These are the people who are trying to reform Islam, who understand that this is a religion that came in a different environment, in a different time than our time, and it needs to go through reforms, the same way Christianity went through reform, Judaism went through reform. We also need to go through reform. So, and unfortunately, the number of those people on the left is not very large. The majority of Muslims exist in the middle, in the categories that we can call the mainstream Muslims. And by the way, being in the middle, this does not mean necessarily that they are moderate or centrist or anything like that. No, they are just mainstream Muslims. They did not decide yet whether to go to this side or that side, which makes them the swinging population that sometimes is influenced by the reformists and follows the reformists, which is very rare, by the way, over history. But most of the time, they are radicalized by the radical Islamists. One of who are on the right side of the spectrum. One of the most interesting examples of how this mainstream Muslim population worldwide is being radicalized is the issue of Palestine and the Palestinian cause. Why? Because many of them believe that Palestine or fighting for Palestine is a divine order. But if you go and read our Quran and holy texts, hadith, and so, there is absolutely no mention of Palestine or the Palestinians or the Palestinian cause or any of that. It's a pure invention of the Muslim Brotherhood, just to manipulate this mainstream population in the middle of the spectrum. When we go to the right of the spectrum, you start to see it is getting more radical as we go further right. So the first group we will meet are what I like to call the official Islamists. They are Islamist institutions, usually managed by governments, like, for example, Al-Azhar in Egypt. It appears to be centrist, but actually they are not. Their job is to manipulate the general public and make them obey the government through manipulating their religious piety and religious sentiments. Then when you go further, you will find the political Islamists, like the Muslim Brotherhood, who usually introduce themselves as the rival to the official Islamists, or as the grassroots alternative to the official Islamists. And actually they play a lot on this by claiming that official Islamists are just serving the Sultan or the king or the person in power, or the president or whatever, but they are the more honest ones. This is what they claim, but they are liars, of course, we know that. From the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas came. But Hamas is not only playing the same games, the same way the Muslim Brotherhood is playing it, which is more political than violent. But actually they are more leaning on the side of the other groups further on the right, starting with the Wahhabists, which some people call the Salafists as well. And then at the very end of the spectrum, the jihadists. So Hamas is so unique. Jihadists, of course, like groups, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and all these groups. The interesting thing about Hamas and other similar organizations like the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and also some of the Iranian militia and so, is that they take the violent part that the jihadists adopt. They are on a jihadi mission and so, but they also have the pragmatism of political Islamists. And they know how to manipulate the general audience, how to manipulate the world, the international community, how to manipulate their even local audience and domestic populations, and so to believe that they really want a nation state, but actually, or want to build a Palestinian state or so. But maybe what not many people know is that all this spectrum, starting from political, all this side of the spectrum, starting from political Islamists up to jihadists, they don't believe in nation state. It's part of their beliefs that we should not abide ourselves as a nation, as an ummah, to one nation state with certain borders. There is nothing called homeland in their terminology.
Yeah, and once we look at this ideological family tree, we immediately see something else, the specific nature of Islamist anti-Semitism, which is not, I wouldn't say it's a religious inheritance, but something far more modern and more imported. Modern Islamist anti-Semitism isn't just Islam. The obsession with Jews as a global conspiracy is Nazi, or the revolutionary posture is Soviet. The Brotherhood, in my view, essentially stitched Nazi anti-Semitism and Marxist revolutionary style into a religious skeleton, so to speak. When you listen to Hamas propaganda or Brotherhood preachers today, how much of it do you recognize as genuinely Islamic tradition, and how much sounds like recycled Nazi and Soviet material? Do Arabs and Muslims even realize how foreign some of these ideas actually are? Because I don't think so.
Actually, it's also a very good question. Anti-Semitism and Islamism are sisters. They go hand in hand, unfortunately, because the Islamist project itself, which, by the way, Islamist is different than Muslims, in case some of your audience don't know. Muslims are just the general public, the mainstream Muslims. Islamists are the ones who try to twist Islam into a political ideology and try to gain to achieve political gains from manipulating Islam as a religion. And they are also more organized, actually, than the rest of other Muslim groups. So the issue here is that the Islamist project itself, from its very beginning, is introducing itself as an objection to the existence of the Jewish people. From the very, very beginning. And it started actually to take shape with Sayyid Qutb in the late 1950s and 1960s. Sayyid Qutb is one of the main early ideologues actually, of the Muslim Brotherhood. And because of his era, at that time, communism was very popular, Marxism, and so he was very much influenced by the Marxist rhetoric, and he twisted it very cleverly, by the way. He twisted it into an Islamist rhetoric. A rhetoric that appeals to the Muslims who follow or look up to the Muslim Brotherhood as a group, as a biased Islamist group, and so. And he succeeded he was the first actually to convince his followers and convince the general sympathizers among the mainstream Muslims, sympathizers with the Muslim Brotherhood, that the Jewish people are enemies of Muslims. Before that, this was not the case. Before that, yes, there was a conflict in this land today between the river and the sea, which was at that time the British Mandate in the 1920s, which all the conflicts of the Middle East revolve around today, where the Israelis and Palestinians live. At that time, the Arabs and Israelis, I'm speaking 1920s and 30s, the Arabs and the Jews who lived at this piece of land, they had their own fights, their own conflicts, their own violence, but it never leaked to other places in the Middle East. Look, for example, in Egypt, which is an immediate neighbor to this conflict. In the 1920s up to 1960s, all the superstars in the movies, not all, but the majority of them, the most beloved ones, were Jewish. The main businessmen in the country, the most successful ones, were Jewish in tourism, in business, in banking, in several sectors. And nobody wanted to kick them out or practice violence against them because of a conflict happening next door. Nobody cared. However, with the birth of the Pan-Arabism movement and this communist era of Egypt, Arab communist era, because they twisted it also to take an Arab flavor, and then the Muslim Brotherhood gave it an Islamist flavor. This was the first time when the Jewish people were highlighted as enemies. Before, actually, we saw only one instance, and I believe it was not very successful, of Haj Amin al-Husseini. He was one of the Arabs in this British mandate that was called Palestine at that time. And he actually worked with the people of Hitler. And there are footage proving that he met with Hitler himself. And from him, he kind of imported this practice of anti-Semitism and hate towards the Jews and politicized it and weaponized it against his Jewish neighbors inside the British mandate of Palestine at that time. And unfortunately, we ended up today with an ideology that glorifies the practice of anti-Semitism to the extent that even now in Western capitals, where we thought that they have already got over this practice of anti-Semitism, there are people in the streets who practice anti-Semitism against European Jews, American Jews, and so in broad daylight without shame, once again. So it's amazing how we cannot get rid of this hate until today.
Yeah, and it is imported anti-Semitism. Becomes even more powerful once you're connected to the emotional engine of the Islamist world, the Palestinian cause. And unfortunately, I feel like since the historical context is missing for most of these young people, it is very, very difficult to mitigate this ideological trap, so to speak. Let's get to Palestine as the Brotherhood's master key. What fascinates me is how the Palestinian cause has been turned into a kind of litmus test of faith. It's not about Palestinians anymore. It's about legitimacy for Islamists. The Brotherhood uses Palestine as a master key. It unlocks Sunni and Shia alliances. And you mentioned Qut was also adored by Shia Islamists like Khomeini. But it, first and foremost, it mobilizes Arab anger. And it weaponizes Western leftist guilt, I would say. From your experience, is Free Palestine today actually about Palestinians, or is it the Brotherhood's master key to mobilize the Muslim world and the Western left for a much wider Islamist project?
It's amazing you mentioned this point because actually many people tend to disregard this. So let's start by making some definitions. First, what is Palestine exactly that we speak about? First, until today, there is no such a state called Palestine. And even the state that we historically know as the British Mandate of Palestine, it did not actually mean the Arab Palestinians alone, as they identify today, but it meant everyone who was living in this piece of land between the river and the sea at that time, including the Jews, and actually the Jews more than the Arabs, because if we look even further back into history, we will discover that even this term, the word Palestine or Palestina, was given to the Jewish people first when they were pushed out of Rome to this piece of land. But then many people today don't know any of that. And they believe there is also, unfortunately, we grow up studying this in our school books and being told this in our media, in our mosques and everything, that this land has always been an Arab land exclusively. And the Jews who escaped from Europe in the time of anti-Semitism, Nazism, and so they came to this place and hijacked it from the Arabs. Nobody speaks about, for example, the Middle Eastern Jews who were forced to leave their Arab countries, literally forced by people like Gamal Abdel Nasser and his ideology and they did not find any place else to go other than Israel, and they went there. And some of them, of course, went to Europe and the United States and other places. But I mean, historically, the Jewish people are indigenous to the Middle East. We should not deny that. Number two, or the second definition we need to make is the Palestinian cause. What exactly is a Palestinian cause? If you go to Western audience and ask them this question, they will tell you, of course, it's about having a two-state solution. It's about giving the Palestinian people a state or the right to decide for their future, their own fate, and so, or a better future or so. But actually, if you go to Gaza today, if you go to the West Bank, if you go even to any Arab country and ask people in the street, what is the Palestinian cause? They will not mention any of that. They will tell you it's about destroying the Israeli state. So this is the problem, is that the Palestinian cause is not about a Palestinian state. It's about destroying the Israeli state. And until we understand that, we will not be able to address all this movement that calls itself resistance. The last thing we need to define is who is a Palestinian today. Unfortunately, the word Palestinian or the identity of a Palestinian has been synonymous to violent resistance. Immediately, think about it. If I told you the word Palestinian, the first thing that will come to your mind, violent resistance. Someone who's willing to be a martyr, someone who's willing to kill any Jewish person he meets or she meets, a woman who's willing to give her children for jihad. This is the Palestinians today. And this is a disaster. This is a disaster. This is so scary. If your identity is all about violent resistance, is all about martyrdom, is all about victimhood, this is a disaster. And in my opinion, this is the main reason why until today the Palestinian people are unable to get a state of their own, unable to build a future for themselves. So if we understand these three things, we will understand why we are in this big dilemma now. So speaking about the Muslim Brotherhood, how they manipulated this, how they used this to their advantage. So since the time of Sayyid Qutb, of course, this was a very sexy topic or very attractive topic to the general public who are sympathizing with their Arab brothers and sisters in other countries, especially in Egypt. We're speaking about the people next door and so it was attractive enough on the local level. But when the Muslim Brotherhood started to immigrate from the Middle East to Western countries in 1980s and 90s in particular, they immigrated in large numbers, mostly actually to three countries: the UK, Germany, and the United States, of course. So it started by this. And from there, while immigrating, they also carried with them, of course, their political Islamist ideology. And they started to think about ways, or actually to strategize, how they can build their own political Islamist empire in the Western countries they immigrated to. And Yusuf al-Qaradawi, one of the most modern ideologues, he died only 2 years ago, and he was operating from Qatar. He came up with this idea. He thought, okay, the cause of Palestine has succeeded in Arab countries, in mobilizing people, gaining sympathy, even mobilizing people from the Marxist movement who are already primed to hate Israel. And so, given its Western affiliation or affiliation to Western values like liberal democracy and so, and let's take this to the Western communities. And he clearly, in his teachings, very, very clearly, he instructed his followers to use the cause of Palestine. He said, actually, it's very hard to unify Muslim communities in the West. There is nothing that can unify them except causes. Chief among them is Palestine, quote unquote. This is what he said. This is one of his main teachings to his followers, to use this cause of Palestine as the glue to connect Muslim communities together and isolate them, segregate them from the Western society they live in, and at the same time use it as a tool to build coalitions with non-Muslims in these societies. Of course, they tried with the liberal, like the classical liberals, the good liberals, as I like to call them, and the modern day liberals, which are the radical left or the progressives, as they call themselves. And actually, they tried several times with several causes to attach themselves with the radical left, I mean the radical Islamist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, and it didn't work. They tried, for example, with the LGBTQ movement, it didn't work. The climate change movement, it didn't work because of ideological differences on these issues. But when we got to the moment of the war in Gaza and the aftermath of October 7 and all of that, it finally gave them the platform they needed to mobilize the radical left on their side. And unfortunately, today, we ended up with a situation where the radical left is doing the job on behalf of the Islamists. They are even actually in Washington here, not very far away from where I speak to you, 2 young people were killed with cold blood because they work for the Israeli embassy. And they were not killed, but killed also with someone who was putting in a kufiya and shouting "Free Palestine." And guess what? This guy who killed them was not an Islamist, was not even from the Middle East. He's an American radical left young man. So they succeeded.
Yeah, it is. It reminds us Iranians of the Islamic Revolution, of course. And it's so uncanny because the glue that united the Islamists and the far left was Palestine. We heard the same slogans in the streets. We saw the same signs. And Khomeini used anti-Semitism to seize power. And it's a master key. It unlocks not only this, let's look at this Sunni Shia story. People think that they are enemies. In reality, the ideological cross-pollination is astonishing, and the glue is again Palestine. It's really interesting. Intellectually, Iranian Islamism absorbed a remarkable amount of Muslim Brotherhood doctrine through this Palestinian cause. The idea of a revolutionary vanguard, an Islamic state exporting revolution, all of that is a Sunni model adapted to the Shia language. To what extent do you think Muslim Brotherhood thinking shaped the Iranian revolution and Khomeinism? After all, Khomeini openly admired Sayyid Qutb, and Khamenei translated several of Qutb's books into Persian. So when you look at Tehran and Gaza today, do you see 2 rival sects or 2 branches of the same Islamist revolutionary project?
Okay, great question. But actually, let's start. You mentioned the Islamic Revolution in Iran, which is very interesting because they also played the same game with the left, the Marxists at that time, and gave them the impression that, we are one team, we're gonna do this together, it's a revolution, we need a change, and as soon as they came in power, the Islamic revolutionists took over Iran, the first things they did was to get rid of these leftists and to try to kill most of them, push most of them outside of the country. So classic, right? So the left does not learn the lessons. The left does not learn the lessons, unfortunately, and they, over history, they kept repeating the mistake again and again. We saw, speaking, also you mentioned something really interesting, the Sunni and Shia divide. Maybe historically and ideologically there are differences between the Sunni and the Shia, and also historically there are differences because the conflicts over power in the history in both groups and so. But when it comes to the geopolitics, it's different. They become the same thing, the same force. And the one thing that unites them, not Palestine, but the hate of Israel, the hate of the Jewish people, and introducing themselves, because by the way, they adopt the same Islamist project, exactly the same Islamist project of hegemony and controlling as much as vast land as possible, except that they just compete with each other who controls more of this land and who has the right to be the leader here. But they don't disagree at all on whether they have to kill or annihilate the Jewish people or not. Unfortunately, it's not only about Israel, by the way. I'm speaking about the Jewish people worldwide, not only in Israel. This is how they think. And so this is where their agreement comes from. And actually, it's not, maybe people should always remember that we saw Iran and its militia, groups like Hezbollah, were working in perfect coordination with Sunni groups like Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is a Salafi jihadist group as well. So there is no difference here. About the influence between the Islamist Shia and the Islamist Sunni, especially the Islamic Revolution in Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and so, the influence changed over time. So there has always been some kind of an admiration between them. As you mentioned, they even took from the teachings of each other, and the ideology and the same, let's say, vision to the world was almost similar between both of them. However, politically, the influence of the Iranian Islamists on the Egyptian Islamists was bigger than the opposite. So because of the success of the Islamic Revolution in 1979, this actually was the trigger that made the Muslim Brotherhood for the first time think about going beyond the local and adopting regional causes that can and revived once again this dream of building the caliphate system worldwide among them, because they saw an Islamist group that they admire, like the Khomeini and his group and so, is now taking over a country as big, culturally rich, powerful, and civilized, even like Iran, and they took it over. And they succeeded in doing so. So why don't we do the same? They were thinking, okay, why don't we do the same? Let's find the cause that we can adopt. And of course, for them, once again, hating the Jews, hating Israel, fighting against Israel was the easiest cause to revive once again. And they started the fight. So the influence, at least in the past, in the last part of our history, you know, this very long history of Islamists in the Middle East, in the last part of their history, the influence was more coming from Iran, the Shia Islamists, on the Sunni Islamists in some countries like Egypt and other Arab countries, more than it is the opposite.
Yeah, and it's really interesting the time horizon they have, I think. Whether Sunni or Shia, it's very long, decades, generations, a project measured in half centuries. The 100-year plan, Dawah, if you look at how the Brotherhood works, it's clearly a long game. And institutions, welfare networks play a huge role too. The caliphate isn't a fantasy slogan. It's the horizon that gives coherence to everything they do. But I think the tools are interesting. As I said, the institutions, the welfare network, that's something we saw in Iran too through the Shia clerics. They could control vast parts of Iran and undermine the monarchy. So you've spoken about Islamists playing a very long game. How explicit is this 100-year plan inside Islamist circles? Do they openly talk that way, or is it more of an implicit horizon that everyone simply understands?
Oh, yeah, actually, it's a strategy. Let's say it's a long-term strategy that they started developing only when they moved to the West. Before, when they were in Arab countries, when they were operating in the Middle East, it was easier for them to show their real ugly face, and we are here to do jihad. Jihad is our way. It's in their slogan even. Jihad is our way, and we are here to do jihad, to do both da'wah and jihad. So they were very clear, very open. You can easily identify who are the Muslim Brotherhood members. It has a structure, very clear structure, and so. When they moved to the West, immigrated to the West in large numbers after the crackdown on them by Arab countries, and by the way, the crackdown on them by Arab countries was not a crackdown on the Islamism. It was a crackdown on the Islamists, which is a huge difference. They cracked down on the Islamists because they threatened their authority, threatened their thrones, not because they are against this Islamism ideology. No, unfortunately. I wish it was the opposite, because it could have saved us a lot of pain today. But what happened is that when these Islamists left, especially from the political groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, left to the West, they learned, or they knew, that Western liberal democracies will not tolerate that, will not tolerate someone coming and saying, I'm here to do jihad, I'm here to do da'wah, which is preaching, in a way, kind of forcing other people to join Islam, to increase the number of Muslims in the world and establish the caliphate system. And for your audience who don't know the caliphate system, in very, very simple terms, it's about Muslims, it's kind of Muslim supremacy. It's about Muslims ruling above everyone else by Sharia, which is the Islamic law, or actually a very extremist version of Sharia. So this is their dream. This is what they want to achieve and their ultimate goal. So they said, okay, now we are in the West. It's liberal democratic countries. It's an open society. We have a chance here. But to do that, we should not show our ugly face. We should not show them that we are here to do da'wah and jihad. We should not tell them that we believe that the world is divided into Dar al-Harb, the house of war, and Dar al-Islam, the house of Muslims, and that we are here to destroy their house of war, which is the house of the non-Muslims. So they needed to create a devious strategy to achieve this goal. And they said it's a long-term process. It will not happen soon. Let's give ourselves 100 years. And they developed a very interesting project in 1982. It's called the Project of the Muslim Brotherhood in the West. It's a very general, vision of what they want to achieve as a group in the West. And it all revolved around one main concept, which is tamkeen, which means empowerment. Empowerment of Islam and their Islamist ideology. And to achieve this empowerment, actually in this document, they did not speak about how we want to achieve it. They said just, this is our goal. We will achieve this within this time span of 100 years and so. Then in 1991, the Muslim Brotherhood in North America, in the United States actually, they came together and they decided, they started to study. This was also after the first Intifada in the Middle East by Hamas and so. So they started to think, okay, now we have a momentum and we need to build on this momentum. And they brought out the project document and they started to make a very detailed plan on how to sabotage the West from within, but starting from the United States, or what they called at that time North America. So they developed another strategy they called an explanatory memorandum for the Muslim Brotherhood strategy in North America. So it's also very interesting because in this strategy, they very clearly, step by step, they say what they want to achieve over this 100 year. And they said the process to achieve tamkeen or empowerment is going to be something called civilization jihad. If you notice, the word civilization is key here. It's not about carrying weapons and going and killing all the Westerners, destroying the West and building a new caliphate system. No. It's just slowly, step by step, and entrenching themselves into main joints of the Western state in policy-making circles, in government, in the educational system, including on the academic level, like the university level and under the high school level, and also infiltrating themselves in the media and manipulating the media narrative, which, well, today Qatar is doing a very good job in this regard, actually. So this was their plan and their goal. Over the years, if we look from 1982 until today, let's say 1991 until today, we're speaking almost 40 years now, or even slightly above 40 years of their plan being in the process. And I think the peak of their plan was in the last 2 years, in the aftermath of October 7, because this was the time when for the first time in the West, they show the real ugly faces they have been hiding for almost half a century since they left the Middle East. So they are succeeding, unfortunately, but at the same time, they are showing us who they really are. And this is somehow is awakening Western countries and Western governments to put limits, to put the brakes on this strategy, on this evil ideology, which does not want anything other than destruction for the Western civilization and the liberal democratic systems.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not only the civilizational war they fight in the West, I think. One of the most effective tools is in their long game is also the infrastructure they build within the Muslim societies through which they control. It's the welfare dahwa complex. Let's put it that way. They became de facto, let's say, it's a welfare state where the actual state fails. Mm-hmm. An Egyptian friend of mine used to describe the poverty so many families live in. Children surviving on bread stuffed with macaroni, she told me, because starch is all they can afford. It's not only devastating physically, cognitively, it impeds development for these children. And on top of that, the so-called education system is relentless indoctrination. Hours of memorizing Quran and Hadith instead of developing analytical or critical thinking. So this is, I think, the main tool how they control, even if they're not in the government, but subversively control societies. And I think in Egypt, although they were pushed out, but they still, to some extent, control society, the Muslim Brotherhood. So when you look at Brotherhood-linked charities and NGOs today in Egypt, in Gaza, but also in Europe and the United States, how much of the work is genuine charity and how much is political religion disguised as social work?
So, the short answer here is that there is nothing genuine about the Muslim Brotherhood. everything they are doing only for the purpose of serving the goals and ambitions of their groups, which is, as we discussed earlier, is basically building a caliphate system where they rule over everyone else. So, but actually it's so interesting. If you remember when we discussed earlier, the Muslim Brotherhood presented themselves all the time as the grassroots alternative, as grassroots activists, people on the side, that they are the group that is on the side of the people, not on the side of the governments, which allowed them or given them a lot of popularity among grassroots citizens. So they were popular among grassroots citizens in countries like Egypt, not only because they preach Islam or preach or play or manipulate religious piety, but because also they were able to provide services to the people, like health services, like even food and supplies and blankets in the winter, and so in very far towns where government services cannot reach, and or where government services cannot reach because of corruption. So they always were careful to fill in this gap, which made them over time popular and made it easy for them in the aftermath of the Arab Spring Revolution in Egypt to take power. Why? Because they are familiar with the grassroots citizens. In the minds of the people, they were thinking, okay, these are the Muslim Brotherhood who were giving us health services and food, and so actually they may not be corrupt as the Mubarak regime was. But actually they were worse. They were exactly the same, as bad as the Mubarak regime was. And people even felt that they became a threat to their identity and quickly tried to remove them from power. But we all know the story. The military took over after that and hijacked our second revolution against the Muslim Brotherhood. So this is really what their winning card, their winning game. If we take this and so this is in Arab countries, especially in Egypt, where they started and have the greatest power. If you take this and go to Western countries and see how when they moved to Western countries, they tried to adapt that. They built parallel infrastructures also for the Muslim communities in these countries. Although actually Muslims in these countries, they can actually, if you look at the Muslims, let's say, who immigrated to Western countries before the 1960s and so, they just integrated into the Western communities they traveled to and became just normal citizens like everyone else, regardless of what their religion was. But what happened is that the Muslim Brotherhood, because actually to gain power also in open societies and in Western liberal democracies, you need to have a base, like a popular base. You need to have a number of votes that you can use to play with policymakers, to influence policymakers. So to do that, they started building an infrastructure of thousands of what they call Islamic centers. And by the way, this was copied in almost every Western country we know, like in the United States, of course, in Canada, even in Australia, in many European countries, well, in Germany, look at Germany, the UK, and so France, unfortunately, they are also very strong there. So they built these parallel infrastructure, Islamic centers. Inside the Islamic center, it's not only a mosque. There is a mosque, there is a community, there is a sports club, there is a school for children up to the high school level, from primary to high, or even kindergarten up to high school level, and so on. So it's a process of isolation and indoctrination to the Muslim communities in Western societies that actually make them hate the Western society they live in rather than integrate into this society. And using that, they eventually use these numbers that they have under their hands, under their control in these Islamic centers, as weapon against policymakers to influence decisions that eventually serve the goals of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, they did the same in Iran. Their Shia clerics. There is a similarity. That's how I mentioned it before, that's how they undermined the Shah. And through their zakat system, they were financially also independent. So it's very, very interesting how these networks work and these power structures. And I don't think the West is equipped for that. If we look at Erdogan's DTIP structures here in Germany, oh my God, don't get me started. So what would you recommend the Western government? Should they regulate it, or should they ban it outright like the UAE has done?
Yeah, actually, I'm against the blanket banning of the Muslim Brotherhood, because actually it will immediately backfire. It should happen gradually. Yeah, it should happen gradually, because look, the infrastructure they built, the Muslim Brotherhood, over the years in Western countries, they were very, very careful to make it as legal as much as they can. So, for example, you cannot just go in the United States and close a charity organization just because you accuse them of being Muslim Brotherhood. Although you have the evidence and everything, but this is not a reason to shut down a charity organization or a civil society organization, or to cancel a certain politician. Unfortunately, this not in the law, in the constitution, is not something that can be used against them. So they understood the legal system very, very well, that it has become very difficult to dismantle their infrastructure. So to do it should not be by just one hit. It should be gradually, by first targeting the soft spots. And in my opinion, the soft spots are the Muslim Brotherhood networks outside the United States, which has already been banned, or chapters, like President Trump said in his executive order 2 days ago. These chapters that has already been banned in Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, and other Arab countries, let's target them first. And based on the criteria of banning them, we will use this and apply to other chapters of the Muslim Brotherhood group, which a process, maybe we can call it a suffocation process. Let's suffocate the Muslim Brotherhood, not factions of the Muslim Brotherhood, not small pieces of the Muslim Brotherhood. Because what happens also, the Muslim Brotherhood are like chameleons. They mutate into another form. So CARE, for example, one of the very famous charity organizations that is ideologically aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood and was even named before it becomes CARE, it was called something else, the Islamic Americans for Palestine, IAP. I just don't remember the name exactly. But when they were accused in the Holy Land Foundation trial in 2008 and labeled as an unindicted conspirators in the case, what they did, they just shut down the IAP, and the same people who were running the IAP just started a new organization and called it CARE. And they can do this forever. They can do this.
Yeah, that is true.
So the trick here is to know where to hit them, how to hit them right and in their soft spots, and also do it gradually, not in one shot, in order to avoid the backfire that may sabotage the whole process of banning them or designating them in Western countries. Also another important concern, by the way, all the Muslim populations that the Muslim Brotherhood are now controlling in their infrastructure system we spoke about, in parallel with dismantling this infrastructure piece by piece, we have to provide a more, let's say, reformist or moderate alternative to contain these Muslim populations, because otherwise they will fall an easy prey to even more extremist groups like the Salafists, the jihadists, you know. So on one side we will be destroying the political Islamists, but we will be also empowering jihadists, people who are even much worse than the political Islamists. So it's a parallel effort.
Oh, it's so complicated.
Yeah, exactly.
All of this, this architecture is targeting especially Europe, I think. For decades, Europe was a soft battlefield. NGOs, mosques, student groups, a whole ecosystem of cultural and institutional jihad. And since October 7th, we have seen how quickly that soft battlefield can harden. Open glorification of Hamas, street attacks on Jews, and a political class that still doesn't understand the ideological infrastructure behind any of this, particularly in Germany, I assure you. From where you sit in the US watching Europe, do Western societies still have time to dismantle the Brotherhood network peacefully, or are we moving into a phase where the soft battlefield begins shifting into open confrontation?
Actually, let me say this. With so much sympathy, my heart aches for Europe. I saw Europe before it gets to this point, and I saw Europe today. And there is a huge difference. It's not the Europe we know anymore. It has been...
Not at all.
Yeah, especially in the past decade, it's kind of, I don't know what happened in the past decade in particular that made Europe so fragile and so an easy prey in the hands of radical Islamists. And I believe big part of that has to do with the tolerance of the European systems and the fact that actually they are, once again, open societies that welcome anyone and everyone and puts the value of freedom of speech and human rights above everything else. So this is one of the things that made radical Islamists manipulate this very easily. Although, in my opinion, from the first day, you saw people standing in the middle of the street claiming that they are there to pray. By the way, there is nothing in Islam that tells people you have to pray in the middle of streets or even in public. On the contrary, the instruction is the opposite. You have to pray in a calm place, in a quiet place, and focus, not in the middle of the street. But why they are doing this? You understood it as Europeans, you understood it, people practicing their religion, let them do whatever they do, they will leave after 5 minutes and so. But from their perspective, the people who did that, it was a projection of power. It was showing you that we are the ones who control you now, the ones who control your land, and the ones who decide when you go to your work and not to go to your work because we want to pray or we don't want to pray. From day one, this happened. There had to be an action. There had to be an action against them because unfortunately they used that. They kept pushing, and you kept opening the door further and further as they push. And we ended up with a situation where Europe is today. It's not too late, though. It's not too late. Perhaps...
I'm happy to hear.
Perhaps you have to hit the bottom before you start to make change. And I think Europe today, especially after the horrific vandalizing of public property, anti-Semitism, and so we saw in the past 2 years, this is hitting the bottom. This is the moment of hitting the bottom. So hopefully this will make Europe rise again and reclaim its own culture and history and civilization from the hands of these radicals before it's too late. So we saw, for example, measures taken by Germany most recently to control the Muslim Brotherhood and other radical Islamist organizations. We saw similar thing happening in France, and also now in the United States we're having the designation of the process of designating the Muslim Brotherhood a foreign terrorist organization has started already a couple of days ago. So we are on track. I believe it's already happening. We are witnessing this moment of awakening of the West to fight against this radical ideology, and I believe it will work. Just don't give up so easily. Don't let them abuse your freedoms, your democracy, and open society, and weaponize them to destroy this very open society that you have.
Daria, thank you so much for the depth, clarity, and courage you bring to these discussions. I hope today's conversation helps more people understand the ideological architecture behind today's crisis. Thank you so much.